All right, wonderful. Well, I am going to welcome everybody officially to today's webinar, Minimum Equity Standard Compliance Plan and Waiver Request Training. I'm honored to pass it over to our first facilitator and speaker, my colleague, Casey Doyle.
Thank you. And one housekeeping item before we get started, I want to ask our team to start the recording now. And once again, welcome everyone to the Minimum Equity Standard Compliance Plan and Waiver Request Training. My name is Casey Doyle. I am the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Sector Strategy Fellow for the Illinois Shines program at Energy Solutions. We're also really grateful to have with us two of our IPA teammates. And so I think I'll have each of them introduce themselves. Kelly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Casey. My name is Kelly Turner. I'm the Interim Chief Legal Counsel for the Illinois Power Agency. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Duffy. I'm the Deputy Legal Counsel with the IPA. Yeah, thank you for taking the time today.
Yes, thank you. And just for everyone's edification, everyone is going to be muted during the presentation today. If you do have questions that you'd like to ask during the webinar, please use the Q&A box, which is most helpful for addressing as many questions as quickly as possible. Make sure to press the Q&A button and not the chat box. We will answer as many questions as we can verbally at the end of today's presentation. A video recording of the webinar, presentation slides, and post-webinar Q&A will be published at the program website following the meeting. So today's agenda includes a review of previously covered EAS materials, the MES compliance plan process and form, the Energy Workforce Equity Portal, we'll give an overview of that, the waiver request process, and then provide some resources and again, a chance to answer questions that come up. So let's move on to the recap of the EAS, or Equity Accountability System. And we'll turn it over to Kelly.
Great. Thank you, Casey. Mike, you can go ahead and put the page. I'm just going to give a quick recap on the Equity Accountability System and some items that have already been covered in past webinars, and just give people a little bit more context on what it is that we will be discussing today. As you all are hopefully aware, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act set out some requirements for the implementation of an equity accountability system. It's really a three-pronged approach, one of which applies only to the agency's competitive procurements for RECs, and so we won't be discussing that portion of it today. The two portions of the equity accountability system that really are applicable to Illinois Shines are the minimum equity standards and the creation of an equity eligible contractor block within the program. So the minimum equity standards apply to all of the applicants to our program and our competitive procurements. And they require that 10% of the project workforce for each participating entity must be comprised of equity eligible persons beginning in the program year that's going to start on June 1st. So remember that we have a program year that runs from June 1st through May 31st of the following year. The project workforce must be 10% equity eligible persons for each entity starting in this upcoming program year, but it is due to increase to 30% of the project workforce by the year 2030. You can change the slide, please. So who are the equity eligible persons, or who are equity eligible contractors? These terms are defined under the law. So an equity eligible person could be a graduate or a former participant of certain job training programs that are listed specifically in the law. So the ones that you see here, they are people who are graduates of or currently enrolled in the foster care system. They are people who are formerly incarcerated, or people whose primary residence is in an equity eligible investment community, which are generally speaking environmental justice communities and R3 communities. And we do have maps of those available in the portal, which I believe that Sarah will be talking about later, or Casey will. An equity eligible contractor, again, we have this definition under the law. It's a business that's majority owned by eligible persons, or a nonprofit or cooperative that's majority governed by eligible persons, or you know, a natural person that's an eligible equity eligible person offering services as an independent contractor. So an equity eligible person, essentially, that owns an entity participating in the program, that entity can qualify as an equity eligible contractor and have that designation within the program and participate in the equity eligible contractor block, as well as in the other blocks of capacity that are open in the program. Next slide, please. Now, if you remember going back 2 slides ago, we talked about the fact that the minimum equity standard requires that 10% of the project workforce for entities participating in the Illinois Shines program be made up of equity eligible persons, which we just talked about. So what is the scope of that project workforce? Well, it's employees, it's contractors, the contractors' employees, subcontractors, and their own employees. You know, everyone who's working on a project through one of those entities would be considered a part of the project workforce. The job duties are directly required by or substantially related to the development, construction, or operation of a solar project that is participating in Illinois Shines. This includes the project workforce that's working in administrative roles, sales, marketing, technical roles, where those workers' duties are performed in Illinois. Next slide, please. This slide gives us a diagram really of how compliance planning and the minimum equity standards will begin and how it will repeat each year. We're going to see more details on this in another slide in a few minutes, but essentially what we have coming up now for June 1st is the compliance plan submittal deadline. We're going to go through today how that's going to be accomplished. The IPA is going to review those compliance plans when they're submitted, and we will issue a rating of those compliance plans. If the compliance plan is insufficient, you'll be informed by June 15th. And then there will be a 30-day deadline to resubmit a compliance plan or submit a revised compliance plan to the agency. We're going to be doing a mid-year tracking review of progress on compliance plans around December 1st. And then in June 1st to July 15th of the following program year, approved vendors are going to submit reports showing their MES compliance was met for the previous program year. And then they will also, you know, at June 1st, submit their compliance plan for the following year. So this is kind of how it will work year over year, generally speaking. In our next long-term plan, we're going to need to increase the component of the project workforce that will be the minimum standard for the 24-25 delivery year. As I mentioned before, we need to propose future increases in order to meet the statutory requirement of having project workforces be made up of 30% equity eligible persons by the year 2030. So, you know, that's something that we will be discussing and proposing and addressing in our next long-term plan and looking at in future years. Next slide, please. That's just a really brief overview of the equity accountability system, of the equity eligible contractor, equity eligible persons definitions and requirements. We did do two other webinars in Q3, Q4 of last year. Those are linked here. We strongly encourage all program participants to please take the time, go back, look at these requirements, try to understand what they are. If you have questions, please follow up with the program administrators. But really want to make sure that everyone has a good understanding of these requirements, where they come from, how to comply with them, so that you're prepared for meeting the standard, not only in the upcoming program year, but in future program years as well. So you can take a look at the link on here and look at the previous webinar recordings, the presentation slides, question and answer documents. And I believe that today's program will be uploaded there as well when we are done. And I believe that that is my last slide, and we're going back to Casey now.
Great, thank you. All right, so we wanted to go over the compliance plan and just remind you that by June 1st, 2023, all non-EEC approved vendors and designees are required to submit MES compliance plans. The plan will outline how the approved vendor or designee plans to achieve the minimum equity standard for the upcoming delivery year. And we give an example here. The compliance plan submitted on June 1st, 2023 will explain how the AV plans to meet the 10% MES for all projects submitted to ABP in the 2023-2024 program year. If an entity applies to be an AV or designee during a delivery year, compliance plans are going to be required at the time of initial application to the program. AVs must amend and or correct compliance plans after review by the program administrator. So within about 14 days at that time. Compliance plans must include the following items: a statement of intent to comply with EAS for the applicable delivery year, a narrative description of how the applicant will meet those commitments, projected number of workers and the demographic breakdown by race, gender, and participation in job training or workforce development programs, or other means of compliance with the standard for equity eligible persons. Plans for the use of equity eligible contractors, if applicable. Applicant classification, i.e. minority owned, women owned, disabled owned, veteran owned, or small business, if applicable. Communication plan for local outreach to increase the utilization of equity eligible persons and equity eligible contractors. And the status of any corrective actions or adjustments from the prior year's compliance plans. Please note that approved vendors do not need to submit compliance plans for their designees, but shall report which designees they worked with in the delivery year to allow the agency to correlate activities and compliance. This is not meant to relieve approved vendors of the responsibility to comply with EAS, but rather to ensure that efforts are not double counted. And in terms of the submission process, a fillable PDF template for MES compliance plans will be available for download by AVs and designees. The form will be shared widely via program update emails, as well as posted on the program website and portal. Vendors will be able to download the fillable form, complete it on their own time, and upload it to the program portal as an attachment. The portal submission window will open in April, and again, all plans are due by June 1st. In terms of evaluation or assessment, compliance plans will be evaluated on the following scale. A rating of 1 will be applied to needs development. The plan will not be accepted without updating of or inclusion of requirements that need resolution or are missing. AVs will need to review, correct, and or include missing compliance items in order for the compliance plan to be approved. There is a risk of non-compliance in this rating. A rating of 2 is considered accepted. The plan will be accepted. It indicates that all compliance requirements are in place for compliance plan approval. And a rating of 3 is considered exceeds requirements. The compliance plan will be approved. This indicates that the entity has committed in their written plan to take internal periodic checks before the mid-year confirmation of progress to evaluate continued effectiveness or risk of the plan, and will go beyond the minimum equity standards by 50%. i.e., if the standard for a delivery year is 10%, they commit to achieving 15%. This will include noting best practices and or areas of adjustment. So we wanted to provide some examples as well. Example reasons a compliance plan may receive a rating of 1 and needs development. A narrative description of how an AV will meet MES is limited or provides little detail. For example, simply states the AV will post job posting to several websites. Demographic information provided for the workforce is missing or incomplete. Another example would be missing any of the reporting requirements outlined in 10.1.4 of the long-term plan. After notification of any necessary corrections within 14 days of plan submission, the AV will have 30 days to amend the plan. Extensions will be granted on a case-by-case basis, and the agency will notify AVs of the final reevaluation status within 21 days of resubmission. So we also wanted to provide you a sample compliance plan that would receive a rating of 1 due to insufficient narrative description of plan, incomplete demographic data on project workforce, and insufficient level of detail on communication plan for outreach. So in terms of insufficient narrative description of plan to ensure minimum 10% EEP workforce composition, this is an example of a response that needs development. Again, insufficient, number 2 is incomplete demographic data on project workforce. You're seeing a lot of blanks here. So there's just a need for an estimated number of equity eligible persons, for example. And then example number 3 is an insufficient detail on outreach communication plan. So this just provides you an example of something that needs additional detail. This is an example of an accepted compliance plan. This is a compliance plan that would receive likely a rating of 2 with all details completed, including a descriptive narrative of a plan to ensure minimum 10% EEP workforce composition, and it has complete demographic data on project workforce, as well as sufficient and thorough level of detail on outreach communication plan. So for example, in terms of sufficient narrative, company X describes their plan to survey all current and new employees to understand if they fall into an EEP category. They state that they'll also plan to partner with local organizations to promote any open positions to applicable groups. You also see that they're under demographic data, they have filled in that information really thoroughly. And then in terms of number 3, you see there a narrative that provides quite a lot of detail on their outreach communication plan. So just want to talk about confirmation and year-end reporting. Each approved vendor and designee designee must submit a year-end report within 45 days after the end of the delivery year in which they participated in ADP through submitting a Part 1 or Part 2 project application. Year-end reporting will consist of an updated version of the compliance plan submitted at the start of the delivery year that provides data on actual performance compared to the original plan. Reporting should also reflect any major differences from the compliance plan, such as new and innovative ways to provide employment opportunities to low-income participants and residents within environmental justice communities. The first reports will be due after the end of the 2023-2024 delivery year. Approved vendors and designees must meet all applicable minimum equity standards before being awarded a contract for RECs under an IPA program or procurement, unless the entity has obtained a waiver.
Sarah, I believe you're going to handle Energy Workforce Equity Portal overview. If we can ask you to resume
Sure.
presenting.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So we just heard all about the compliance plan submission process and the evaluation. So what we expect to see in the compliance plans is how you're going to approach hiring equity eligible persons. And this can be one tool for doing that. The Energy Workforce Equity Database or Equity Portal launched on January 31st of this year. This is still the first phase of the portal. We are hoping to have kind of additional phases, phase 2, add improvements as we go, as more information is available on things like the workforce training programs that DCEO will be running, additional grant programs, and recruiting opportunities. So we see this portal as a tool not only for employers, but also for job seekers. They can come here to apply to be certified as an equity eligible person. They can choose to be listed and visible to employers, and they can also view clean energy job postings. The most relevant piece of this portal, I think, for this presentation is that approved vendors and clean energy project developers can advertise open positions that they have where they are seeking to hire equity eligible persons. We have already had several job postings submitted and posted. We are still working to make sure that all of the potential equity eligible persons are aware of this. We're working closely with DCEO to send out this information to all of their workforce training program managers at all of the entities administrating those programs. Additionally, we will be doing outreach to community-based organizations. So this will hopefully serve as a really great resource going forward. Next slide. So I'm now going to go over the waiver request process. We actually just posted the final request process on Friday, along with a scoring rubric. That was after we took into consideration a variety of comments and stakeholder feedback that we've received. So for those of you on this call that did provide that feedback, we really appreciate it. It's been very helpful. Next slide. So the waiver really is meant to be kind of a backstop after approved vendors and designees have really tried all that they can to achieve compliance with the minimum equity standard. We are still expecting all AVs and designees to submit a compliance plan, even if they don't think they will be able to comply, because you never know until you actually, put the feelers out there, attend the job fair, post the position. We do recognize, though, that especially in these first few years, there will be kind of a lag between the requirements coming into place and really filling out that pipeline of eligible persons to fill those positions. So we'll be accepting, or Energy Solutions will be accepting waiver requests on a rolling basis. That was something that came out loud and clear through the comment process, that every entity is really different in their project timeline, in the amount of information they might have ahead of time, whether they use the same staff and so they know exactly who is on their crew, or whether they hire for each individual project. So that was something that was really helpful to hear it back in the comments, and we've decided to do a rolling basis for accepting waiver requests. Next slide. So there's a lot of information on this slide. Apologies for all of the heavy text. This document is posted on the ABP website on the Equity Accountability System page. There is a pretty detailed narrative description that follows what was outlined in the plan. We are asking for a narrative description of the entity's efforts to recruit equity eligible persons. So whether they use the Energy Workforce Equity portal, whether they've reached out to the workforce development programs run by DCEO, other workforce development programs, whether you've kept applications on file. Someone might not be a great fit for this particular position, but they are an equity eligible person, keep them on file for future openings. Whether you're participating in job fairs and local community events, evidence of efforts to work directly with equity eligible contractors is also something we'll be looking for. And next slide, please. Additionally, advertising on social media or on various job posting sites, and that you have collaborated with state agency websites. So I know the state runs Illinois WorkNet and Illinois Works, and various other resources for people looking to find jobs related to state government activities. We did end up developing one waiver scoring rubric for projects that will be relying on organized labor, and one for those not using organized labor. So there are some of these elements that are slightly different for those that for those entities that are employing organized labor for their workforce. Next slide, please. So this is just to note that the enforcement or the consequences for not meeting the minimum equity standard are forward-looking. So if an entity is unable to meet the minimum equity standard and they do not end up getting a waiver because they have not demonstrated sufficient efforts, they may be limited in their ability to submit projects to the program in the next program year. So we will probably be mapping out some sort of standard disciplinary actions. There might also be heightened scrutiny for those that end up getting suspended multiple times in a row. And that is also something where the law asks us to start working directly with approved vendors or designees that are having trouble meeting the MES in multiple years in a row. And we are going to kind of try to take a more proactive approach to make sure that we see this as an instance where people need support rather than necessarily something that was done out of hostility or you know, a desire to not comply. Next slide, please. Okay, so we also had a lot of support for our proposal to allow waiver requests on a portfolio basis for distributed generation projects. We are still going to require waivers for community solar projects be per project rather than a portfolio. And for some of the categories where you can submit a DG or a community solar project, so like the public schools category, those can be included in that DG portfolio-based request. And then we had a slide on our definition of the project workforce, but I'm not sure if that ended up in the deck. Mike, do you know? Because I think I added that over the weekend.
I believe we had it in an earlier at slide 7. Would you like me to go back?
Oh, okay. So
Sarah?
Kelly has already covered all of that. I just know that someone
Yes.
put it in the chat of a question. And that was something that had been asked in the stakeholder feedback request about, you know, trying to suss out the various guidelines for how to consider certain employees. Because there have been so many questions on that, we are talking internally about posting an FAQ on that issue specifically. So please stay tuned for that. I know that's been causing kind of some confusion. So I think that's it for me.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we also wanted to spend just a couple of minutes going over some resources, and then we can address any questions that are in the chat or in the Q&A section. So we want to remind you all that we have dedicated support resources for each sector called sector strategists. The contact information for each sector is listed here, and we encourage stakeholders seeking support to contact the appropriate strategist for the sector or sectors in which they participate. Our sector strategists, along with our other teammates from the program administrator, support weekly office hours as well, where we'll continue to offer, in conjunction with other team members, the kind of support that is needed to comply with this compliance plan. Okay, again, here is the compliance plan implementation timeline, and where you can find support materials. Coming soon are the new collateral and content, which is the updated website content guide to the equity accountability system, and Spanish language materials. Great. And then in terms of attendance, please fill out the webinar attendance form by scanning this QR code below or following the link posted in the meeting chat. For lay viewers, the link and or QR code will be posted on the program website. And with that, I think we can jump into any questions that appeared in the Q&A.
Yeah, and Sarah, Kelly, I want to ask you if you'd like me to begin reviewing some of the questions we've been able to answer online already. If you'd like to start to address some of the new ones, can you let me know your preference towards sharing some of the information more widely or expounding on anything we've already shared? What would you like to see?
I think we can start with some of the questions that were already answered. Sarah already addressed, there was a question in the chat about the 10% project workforce and a question about out-of-state determination. We'll be providing more guidance, as Sarah said, in an FAQ online, but I did provide some more answers in the chat on that, and we could go back to slide 7 to talk about that some more. So the project workforce really includes the project installation workforce, as well as administrative, sales, marketing, and technical workforces, but those workers' duties need to be performed in Illinois to count towards the 10% workforce. I think that answers that question, but if there's any follow-up on that, feel free to drop it in the chat.
Kelly, there have been a couple of questions on treatment of designees and nested designees. I feel like you might have kind of a better handle on that if you want to just generally go over that.
Yeah, I think if the I'm trying to find that question specifically because
I think they're still open. They're not in the answered.
Great, thanks. Sorry, I'm not seeing it, but generally speaking, I think AVs can certainly report on the work of their designees, of their nested designees, is applying to their projects. So where you have designees or nested designees that are involved in your project workforce, either in installation or in other work, go ahead and provide information on those subcontractors towards your minimum equity standard requirements.
There's a question in here about, and there's a similar question on incarceration, but there's a question about documentation for proving that someone qualifies based on participation in foster care system. At this time, the agency is requesting an affidavit or an attestation from the individual in question. We understand that, you know, the documentation of these things particularly can differentiate state to state. It might be many years ago when the person was a minor. So we are at this time only requiring an attestation, and that can be completed in the Energy Workforce Equity Portal, or there's a copy of an kind of template attestation available on the ABP website. Additionally, for incarceration, we also at this time are not requiring a specific different type of documentation, just the attestation, agreeing that they understand that, you know, if there's evidence that they misrepresented their status as formerly incarcerated, there could be disciplinary action for the approved vendor.
One other thing I'd note on that is the attestation is all that's required for the application. Of course, you know, the program administrator or the IPA may have additional questions or ask for additional verification if we feel that it's necessary or possible to obtain. And so I just want to point out that we reserve the right to ask for that.
There's another question in the chat about whether this applies to a developer whose personnel all reside outside of Illinois. As we noted in the definition for project workforce, the key question is where the work occurs. So if there are developers that are bringing out-of-state crews, so people who don't live in Illinois, but they are coming to construct a project for, you know, a significant period of time, or even if it's not significant period of time, if they are constructing or doing the development work in Illinois, those individuals have to count toward the MES, and that developer has to comply with the MES.
Thank you, Sarah and Kelly. I want to speak to a couple items that were asked and answered. A couple folks asked when the compliance plan document will become available, and we expect to deliver that in the early part of April, allowing ample time for early submission of those compliance plans in time for program year 23-24. You can expect to find an update in short order in the weekly program announcement, so please stay tuned there. There was another question that was answered. Does the compliance plan scoring impact project scoring for REC allocation in the case of traditional community solar projects? And the answer there is MES requirements are separate from scoring for project selection for traditional community solar scoring, I should say. I wanted to ask the agency, someone has posed question related to the waiver that you shared, Sarah, was published Friday at the program website at the Equity Accountability System page. Is there a minimum score required for a waiver? Or can you talk about the mechanics of that a little bit in advance of stakeholders reviewing that more closely? If that's best answered in an FAQ afterward, specific to the waiver, we can also handle it that way with your preference.
Yeah, I think we might need to follow up on this. I'm looking at what we published on Friday. We did have a minimum score. I don't think that it actually got published on the form for the score. We're also putting together a rationale document that'll be published this week that explains the waiver rubric and how it was developed this week, and it will be contained in there, but we can follow up on this as well. I don't want to say what I think we settled on as the minimum score, just in case I'm wrong. I just don't have it right in front of me.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Kelly. So as everyone may have heard, the agency will be publishing a rationale document and providing some supplemental information with regard to how waiver requests will be scored. So please keep an eye open for that, and including publication at the Equity Accountability System page of the program website. Okay, we're getting through some questions. Yeah, please go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, Mike, there's a question in here about the kind of use of the term delivery year in talking about the MES application. What we're expecting is that the compliance plan and the MES will apply to work that has happened in that delivery year. But that also includes, remember, the project workforce can include office workers if they're doing their duties in Illinois. So if your project participated in the program, so you submitted a project, a Part 1 application, but maybe the construction hasn't isn't expected to start in that delivery year, but you have other staff, again, whose duties are performed in Illinois, that is working on that project in that delivery year, the MES would apply to those people as they make up the part of the project workforce. So the MES applies to work conducted in that delivery year on projects that are participating in IPA programs.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Are there some other, we're getting through most of the open questions. There's some of the answered questions that we'd like to review. As a reminder, by the way, we will publish a full and complete question and answer following today's webinar, and that'll be posted to the program year updates section, as well as the EAS page of the program website. So you can look forward to that document. Are there other open or answered questions that we can take on at this time? See one question, and this may be part of the clarifications that were indicated would be offered. Does it matter what state the person was in when in foster care, for example, in foster care in Indiana, but now reside in Illinois. Is that an easy one for the agency to react to?
Yeah, we posted a definition of former participant in the foster care system as including foster care in other states as well. So yes, that would still qualify that person.
Okay,
And
thank you.
to clarify, I think the same is true also for formerly incarcerated individuals as well. The
Thank you,
statute and the program requirements do not place any limitation on it. It doesn't have to be graduates of the Illinois foster care system. It doesn't have to be an individual who's formerly incarcerated in Illinois. And there are definitions for both of those items on the program website as well, if there are any other questions about those definitions.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to review a couple that were asked and answered. Is there a link to the previous recorded webinars mentioned at the beginning of this webinar? Yes, those are found both at the Equity Accountability System page of the program website, as well as the program year updates of the page of the program website. So you can find those there. There's a question about linkage to maps for R3 communities and environmental justice communities. We will make sure those are prominently featured on the program website, as well as in the Q&A. They were part of the Q&A following the November 15th webinar. We'll make sure those are included in follow-up to today's webinar as well too. We have some overlap on questions, which is why we are thumbing through them to see if we've got any novel questions or if they're really forms of something that have been asked and answered. I want to ask Sarah, Kelly, or Casey if they see other questions that we haven't spoken to or which we haven't pledged to respond to offline, either through rationale or Q&A or another means. There's a question here I want to pose to the agency. Do AVs need to work directly with equity eligible contractors, or can the AV's general contractor work with and contract with them?
Yeah, so first of all, to meet the minimum equity standard, you don't necessarily need to work with equity eligible contractors. You just have to have at least 10% of the workforce be equity eligible persons. So that could happen without directly working with an equity eligible contractor. That being said, the project workforce is defined to include contractors, subcontractors, and the employees of your subcontractors. So if you have a general contractor who is, your contractor, you have a contract with them and they're, a client of yours to some extent, then they can be the ones that actually directly hire the equity eligible contractors or equity eligible persons all down the chain. That is all included in your project workforce. So, it's not that the AV, if the AV does not directly hire the project workforce, they can have their general contractor do so.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Valuable clarification. Attendee has asked if there's a direct contact email we can reach out to with questions if something arises down the road. And the answer is yes. I'm going to share sector-specific support emails that the program administrator has provided. And as Casey mentioned, we also offer weekly office hours. We'll probably offer supplemental sessions in conjunction with the release of the compliance plan form. But these emails are designed to help you reach a sector strategist dedicated to specific projects and support both for EAS, MES efforts, but wider program project needs. Kelly, sorry, Casey, anything you'd like to add around sector strategy support?
Yeah, so each of our sector strategists are aware of the compliance plan requirements, are able to answer any questions around that. Our team is working directly with the IPA on making sure that the forms will be available in a timely manner. As you know, that includes the compliance plan and the waiver form. So yeah, these emails are the best way to submit any questions.
Yeah, and I'll just mention, thank you, Casey, that the sector strategy team soon launching roundtable forums, and you'll have even dedicated offline forums to talk about conditions specific to the sector or sectors that you're operating in. So keep an eye open for those, and in addition to the individualized relationships that you may be benefiting from. Just flipping through the questions, I believe we've answered most all live or with a pledge for follow-up. Sarah, Kelly, I want to ask if you see any others that we have not gotten to, or
I see one that's open, and I thought maybe someone was just typing an answer, but it doesn't look like it. There was a question about whether or not designees must submit a compliance plan as well. And the answer to that is yes. The long-term plan explains that approved vendors and designees must submit compliance plans to the agency. But obviously a subcontractor's work may be part of an AB's project workforce and would count towards the approved vendor's compliance with the MES.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelly. Casey, I've got a question here. Are the sector strategists for community solar the same staff that perform the TCS scoring? Is that something you can?
Yes, so the answer there is no, they were not the same staff who did this TCS scoring. Sector strategists are on the strategy team, and those that conducted the TCS scoring are on our operations team.
Yeah, I just want to clarify again, that minimum equity standard requirements are different from the project selection requirement, or I'm sorry, the scoring and the project selection for traditional community solar. So as we are looking at project eligibility for the program, that's separate from MES compliance. And as Sarah mentioned, I think earlier when we're talking about the failure to meet MES requirements, that could impact the ability to participate in the program in the future under the provisions of the long-term plan as they stand right now.
Great. Thank you. That's a series of helpful clarifications. We got another question, and I believe it was Sarah may have spoken to this in part earlier. Do you have examples of affidavits or attestation forms for equity eligible persons, previously incarcerated individuals, or in foster care, or our stakeholders to manage this on their own? And Sarah, I believe you spoke to
Yeah.
could I ask you to? Thank you.
Yeah, so if you want, I mean, honestly, like the easiest thing would just be to have them fill out the form to get certified through the workforce portal, the Energy Workforce Equity Portal. That includes an attestation that the legal team at IPA wrote. We also have a PDF, I think it's a downloadable PDF of the attestation. It's in the On the adjustable block program site, where you actually go to apply to become an equity eligible contractor, the attestation for equity eligible persons is part of that application, because in order to be an equity eligible contractor, you have to have equity eligible persons owning the business. And so those can be downloaded as well. It's just a PDF if you would prefer to have like a physical copy. And then you can just ignore the half of the other pages that are specific to equity eligible contractors about ownership of the company. And I see Olivia has been helping out. Maybe if she can put a link to where that might be on the ABP website in the chat for everyone, that might be helpful.
Yeah, I can tell you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Olivia.
I was gonna say I'd happy to do so. I don't think my chat option allows me to send it to the whole group.
I see. Okay.
Let me see. I'm not sure I've got that either. I can tell you that at the program website, there's a page called Become an Equity Eligible Contractor, as Sarah indicated. That can be found under the Vendors and Projects tab, and then there's a sub-tab called Become an Equity Eligible Contractor, and you can find that attestation form that Sarah described right there.
And I did just drop the link into the that question under the answered question, so you all should see it now as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Natalia and Olivia. Great teamwork on that one. Okay, I think we're just through all of the questions. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of great questions. Thank you. Thank you for being engaged and interested. We will follow up with a formal publication of the recording, the presentation slides, and the Q&A, and including follow-up on rationale and other documents that our presenter spoke to today. I'm going to give Sarah Duffy, Kelly Turner, Casey Doyle one more opportunity if they'd like to make any closing remarks before we conclude here. Casey?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank all the program participants for attending today. We really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about this process and the support resources we have for you on this. So thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, Kelly, any final words?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Casey had to say. Thank you all for joining us today. You know, the minimum equity standard is a very important component of the equity accountability system and an important component of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And as always, if any of you have any questions as you're navigating this process, please feel free to reach out to the IPA or to the program administrator, and we can get your questions answered for you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. And Sarah, anything before we sign off from you?
No, just thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you to our presenters, and thank you to all of our participating stakeholders today. Have a great day, and we'll get these materials out to you. Thank you.